So the name of the panel here is The Race to Space. Who will control global communications and satellites? My name is Rick Tumlinson. I'm the author of Why Space, The Purpose of People. I've been engaged in the space field for a little while, doing some different things, and working largely to help the commercial private sector open up the frontier. I wanted to introduce Yossi Yamin, founder of SpacePharma. He's accomplished 15 launches into space, and among these, 2 independent CubeSat laboratories, which allow research on drug disease modeling, bacterial virulence, and longevity, all within a Nexus lab structure, and they're remotely controlled as well. They've done 75 experiments so far in Earth orbit. Next to me is my old friend, Bob Richards.
Longtime friend.
Longtime friend, and we still tolerate each other. But Bob was one of the co-founders of the International Space University, one of the first and largest collaborative space organizations, non-governmental, that's been around for a while now. He was also a co-founder of the Singularity University. Now he has Moon Express, and is working on Earth X and
Planet 3 and Planetary Capital.
Planet 3 and Planetary Capital.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Bob was pointing out that we're in the HAL room. Those of you who know what HAL refers to is...
Who knows what HAL refers to?
Yeah, how many of y'all know about HAL? Okay.
Let's start there.
Yeah. You don't know what HAL is?
Nope,
I can't do that, Dave. 2001, Space Odyssey? Yes. Open the pod bay door. No, anyway, so Arthur C. Clarke, who was a friend of ours actually, essentially invented the GEO orbit, which is the orbit that basically the orbit is moving as fast as or relative to the surface of the Earth, so that's where we have geostationary. That's your dish TVs and your stationary satellites that appear to stay in the sky along with you. So it's a very appropriate room. So today we're going to talk about who controls space in terms of these technologies, communication, monitoring, etc. There is, of course, this dynamic tension that's been going on. Governments versus private sector versus Elon Musk. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier too was that there are groups of government that, for example, GEO, which is monitored by a government entity, intergovernment entity, and there are only certain slots that are based on the arc of the Earth, and those slots get allocated to different countries that can then do what they want with them. At the same time, when you get into low Earth orbit, here we go. Thank you very much. Oh, never mind. We are talking about pets. Sorry. When you get into low Earth orbit, though, that doesn't exist. And so we've been put into sort of an unfortunate position where, because the regulators have been behind enterprise, there's been this sort of almost laissez-faire approach to low Earth orbit of you guys monitor yourselves. Well, what you're basically saying then is we're creating the law of the jungle in low Earth orbit, because the biggest, baddest, most funded, most powerful will rule, and we're seeing that right now. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just pointing out that that's what we're seeing. So we've got Starlink. I think Amazon is going to be rolling out its Kuiper. I think it is Kuiper.
Yes, Kuiper built.
Amazon Leo.
Yes, Amazon Leo. And then China is, of course, rolling out theirs because, God forbid, we leak information to their people. So these are all happening right now. And it's really it could turn into a serious mess. Now we're looking at ODC, orbital data centers, which great. maybe let's get them off the Earth. There are other solutions, potential for that, that are coming down the line that I won't speak of right now. But taking them from the Earth and putting them in space, which presents a whole series of other problems we might talk about. So all of this is happening. And it's really, yes, to the benefit of people. I mean, I have a place out in the middle of the desert in West Texas, and I have Starlink, and it's amazing, right? I used to go there and stay for 1 or 2 nights. Now I can go stay for 4 or 5 because, I can watch my CNN or MS Now or whatever I watch. But then on the other hand, and of course that's happening around the world. As we know, recently it was disclosed that they're getting Starlinks into Iran. On the other hand, these vital communications are being put in the hands of the private sector. So, for example, when Elon decided to turn it off when Russia was invading Ukraine for certain purposes, it was an individual decision. So I'm going to hand it over to Yossi because I know he's getting ready to say something. Go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Chris. So, after a long session that we held about Moon and Mars, yeah, we can run it, but I read it. I think if data is the new oil that we are all aware of, data is the new oil that's running our decision, economy, whatever it is, everywhere, anywhere, anytime, then space is the new ocean that carries it. And there is a specific reason for that was just described. But we need to decide who will sail it, means to run it. Because every signal, every bit, every byte, geolocation, either for industrial purposes, economic purposes, or military purposes, is already going through space. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. Now let's do a little exercise. I will shut down satellites in orbit. Okay? Darkness. You don't know where to go. No CNN, right? No Starlink, no Viasat. The world might collapse. And that's a very important question. Who is going to monitor, to decide, to manage this jungle of data all over? China, USA, collaboration, private sector, industrial, governments, or a joint consortium. And this is actually very important. We will discuss it and we will share with you our opinion. My opinion is there is no single person that can control it. Even if you feel, you read, and you think that Elon Musk is the king of universe, or even more, he doesn't know how to push the appropriate button, believe me. Please.
Robert? So I was thinking about maybe taking a step back about how do we get here?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I think the main title is The Race to Space, and I was thinking about how the answer to that depends who you ask and when you ask it. Mm-hmm. And the original race to space happened in that era of the 60s when the idea was what government was going to dominate low Earth orbit. Right. And the race to space, which was between the Soviet Union and the United States, and the Soviet Union was far ahead of the United States. They had already done the first orbit of the satellite, Sputnik, beep, beep, it just went beep, beep, beep. But that terrified the world because they didn't know what it was. So there was a lot of fear. Those who knew the implications, like those in, let's say, the Pentagon in the United States in particular, knew that little beep, 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 harmless ball could be a warhead. And that meant that could reach across the ocean. So that was a big deal. So it was not just about the appearance of technical superiority, which happened a little later in that decade. It was about actually getting to orbit first and catching up. So the race was catching up to the Soviets, who did the first. Go ahead.
At the same time, just building on what you said.
Yeah.
So I think the Gary Powers incident, U-2, had happened before that, right? And
that was when
So you could shoot down a surveillance aircraft.
Yeah.
Right? But then here's this little satellite that's so high up, because we're going to come back to shooting satellites down. The satellite flying over, you can't shoot it down. And there was a panic. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. And so you had an autonomous capability that was not defensible.
Right.
And so that was a big deal. And so it was not just the first satellite, then the Soviets did the first human in space, first man in space at the time, but it's the first human in space, first spacewalk. So the race to space was about that, was the actual governments getting positions in space. So in the early days of the space age, the hardware in Earth orbit was government because it was too expensive. There was no capital that could empower a private sector company to do that because the launch vehicles were owned and built by the government. Huge expense. Nobody was thinking about Starlink constellations or anything like this. It was just a government domain. And then it was because our friend Arthur had pointed out that this geosynchronous orbit, you could put a satellite that far out that would always be at the same point of Earth.
Right.
And if you put three of them, like in a triangle, you could cover all the Earth all at the same time, and they could talk to each other. And
That's important. Only three.
Yeah.
Only three satellites
Only three.
can control the entire communication on Earth. Did you know that?
in the
Three.
right place, because they can see 1/3 of the Earth at the same time.
Yep. And then there was Telstar and things like that. But go ahead.
So then that became the commercial. So that was the beginning of the commercialization. So commercial communications, commercial satellites didn't follow. Well, let's go like to low Earth orbit and let's go to No, it started in geosynchronous orbit,
Right.
with very large satellites and large corporations that could afford to do that. But that was the beginning of the commerce of space. So the commercial network of planet Earth had moved off the planet by 40,000 kilometers, by 25,000 miles, right? And we had this economic bubble. But low Earth orbit was just it was just a place for maybe stopping on your way to geosynchronous orbit, because all the satellites back then, the technology was big.
Yeah.
Some of the satellites were half the size of this room.
Right.
So that meant that you needed really big rockets. So it's just not in the realm of entrepreneurs.
And you needed big dishes, and if you drive around, you can still see them occasionally out
big
in the
dishes. Remember
farmland.
some of
these
those-
old
remember those
giant
things?
dishes. laying
Yeah,
out there.
yeah, because you had to like a big bucket. You had to capture the big signals.
So Yossi, you wanted to take us back into some
Yeah.
briefing
So
here.
we moved from 3 satellites, which are huge and humongous, to constellations. And constellation is the word, the terminology that represent massive amount of small satellites. You know, small can be defined, okay? It can be a few kilograms, it can be tens of kilograms, but it can be also, I think Starlink, it's 226 kilogram per Starlink, right? Not so small, but still compared to the tonnage that we were aware of, it was a big change. So this new constellation now can provide the replacement to the geosynchronized satellites. So why do we need replacers for a good technology, right? Why we had to move to constellation at all? When Elon Musk, he's a brilliant guy, right? His team is, I don't know who else there. But he developed the Falcon 9, which is only the launcher that can launch to LEO, right? Not so far. Not for GEO at the beginning. This is a Falcon Heavy. He had to use his capacity. So the source layer, or the essence of launcher, had to capture new technology, and this is Starlink. I think 14,500 units were registered, and he need launchers. So the Falcon 9 serve his Starlink, and now his Starlink will go to Falcon Heavy that can do more things, let's say towards moon, even further, and that implement his business concept. So with Starlink, he can control data. And if he has Tesla, he can use this Starlink to inject data and to manage his Tesla applications and provide us music, right? He can provide us advertisements, economy, and that's how it built around this launcher. A layer of launching, a layer of satellites, a layer of application, and then you generate the ecosystem economically viable. But what is within it? Do we know what is within the satellite? Only simple applications? Only commercial bits and bytes? What is there? Try to imagine.
I was just going to say, that wasn't his plan.
Yeah, that wasn't his plan.
That wasn't his plan, right? And and Elon, and which
He got there, but that wasn't
He
his
got
plan.
there.
that wasn't his plan.
His goal. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I will do it. So
I'll come in after.
yeah, I actually knew him before.
We knew him before he was Elon.
Yeah,
okay?
we knew him before. He was some guy who sold PayPal. He said he was going to send a terrarium to Mars. Somebody dragged me out of a conference and said, there's this guy here. He just sold this PayPal thing.
He wants to send a plant to
Yeah, he was
Mars.
going to send a plant to Mars. I told him he was full of
Fertilizer.
fertilizer for the plant. And he ignored me, and he went and he started a space company because he couldn't find anybody who would launch that terrarium to Mars. So he started sort of almost like an green approach. And what happened was the idea of, okay, I've got this thing. I'm building this launcher. What can I do with it? How can I make some money off of it? And there's a friend of ours, General Pete Warden.
Yes.
Yep. And he came up with the perfect term. He calls it a self-licking ice cream cone. So he created his own financial ecosystem, vertically stacked, to be able to launch these satellites. Now, what he does is he flies the satellites, gets to a certain point. Now he's got the availability. He's reached a maturity, and he is able to show that he's got safety. He's got all of these things, and then he can fly people, and then he could do that. Now, you've just got to imagine this guy sitting around who is smarter than the average bear, as we might say, and he's looking at all of this and he starts putting these things together, right? And so if you're going to go to Mars, what do you need? Well, you need robots. You need to be able to dig under the ground, boring company. You need to do all of these different things, and they all sort of start to fit together. On top of that is then you move into, let's call it megalomania and control. And look at what I've got, and look at, I can turn this off and I can do this. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Yossi. Go ahead.
Okay, megalomania, it's one thing, but within the satellite, we can hide technologies for geopositioning purposes, right? And now we move from the commercial sector to the defense, to the government, wars, where to strike, how to strike, who will get the appropriate geolocation, who will not get it, who will get the data, who will not get the data. And this is where we need to step in. We need to step in because we cherish new technologies. That's first. But once the activities are freedom to operate means good for everyone, it's obvious we like it. When it turns to be a frightening vehicle, means you can use security through it, you can use striking by it, and you can do wars or stop wars, that's a very strong governmental task. And that's where we need to step in and say, we like Elon, we want more like Elon, right? He gave us a lot of freedom. But at the end, we need to say, stop. Means, what is it inside? Why you gave it to, I'm just giving an example, to Ukraine and not giving it to, name it, Venezuela. I don't know. Right. So who is taking this decision? Elon? The Pentagon? Sitting together? You don't know.
We don't know. Bob?
So maybe to bring in a couple of other threads of ideas, because I think if we can establish what we're talking about as where these things have come from, say where we are, then maybe we could talk about where we think it's going to go. Because the race to space can be asked to multiple people at multiple times for multiple answers. We talked about the original race to space. What we're talking about now is low Earth orbit. How did low Earth orbit become possible for private companies? That is being, we're talking about one particular person here at this conference a lot.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people in the business of sending small satellites, including SpacePharma, into low Earth orbit, because I talked about the commercial sphere of Earth that was originated in the geosynchronous satellites, big companies, big satellites, very few of them. Now it's a lot of little companies with thousands of little satellites all over. How did that happen? Well, that is a result of exponential technology collapsing the size and the cost of technology. What used to fill a room as a satellite back in the 60s is now in this phone. This is a spacecraft. This has location. This has cameras. This knows its orientation. The only thing it doesn't have is little rockets.
Yep.
So if you just attach some rockets to this thing and put a little star, so it can take the pictures of the stars. You send it to orbit. This is a spacecraft, and that means that the capital needed to put these little satellites in orbit is accessible to small companies. It's an entrepreneurial. It's a venture, so you can start a small company, space company. We do it all the time now.
Right.
And so that's why it's now a competitive. So the race to space for young entrepreneurs is to get their idea into low Earth orbit and start making money because it's close to the credit cards. There's also another race going on beyond Earth orbit to the moon. And maybe we could talk about that, not maybe now, but later. But I think there's a new race to space.
Yeah, we're going to move out from Leo.
We're going to move out in a minute. Yeah, Leo. Yeah.
So we are in this position now. One of the challenges I have, and again, this has to do with this entire event. I keep running into this, that somehow the general word government implies good. Right? You know, that private sector, we need the government to keep them under control. Which government do you mean? The Iranian government? Chinese government? Who's in charge? Right? Which government do you want in charge of the private sector? And relatively speaking, which one is the most dangerous? The private sector or the public sector? And we have to, I prefer something like the free nations of the earth or something like that. Now, that I can go with, right? Where they're working together. Because one of the things that is happening is the access to information. And I think I may have mentioned, I can't remember if I mentioned it early on, but there's Starlink dishes being smuggled into Iran right now that are feeding information flow to the freedom fighters in that country. So this is a mixed situation. There is no demon here. There is no, other than perhaps the powers of autocracy. But as far as the private sector goes, I don't think there's a demon here. It's just out of control in terms of regulation, in terms of how do we, if we're going to have 50,000 satellites flying around orbit, how do we protect Sandra Bullock and George Clooney? I mean, they're going to get hit by debris. I mean, but on the flip side of that, and I want to move into this for just a moment, if you don't mind, how do we stop powers in orbit from attacking each other? We've already seen the Chinese, and I think the Russians as well, do an anti-satellite test where they blew up something. And those pieces are still flying around. How do we deal with that? And I would love to hear your opinions on that, both of y'all.
There is space policy, right?
Yeah, okay.
Above regulation. So the policy is to allow regulation to shape into it for the space debris removal, for example, right? Mm-hmm. We are preparing for a collision. Hopefully, we'll not exercise too much collision, but to remove debris from anti-satellite launchers that generate massive debris clouds around. And so we have policies that every object which above, let's say, 1 Q or a few centimeters need to be monitored, and at the end need to be removed if it will generate hazard or risk to one of the national assets. But not only the national assets, now it's going into the commercial platforms like Starlink. So you need to add maneuvering systems into each satellites, which before it was a very smart stone, right? It was smart stone orbiting Earth. Now you need to add maneuvering device. So you can escape collision or be able to move into the, to burn into the atmosphere, or have another, if it's a big one, you need to go to the dead zone, the grave area of the satellite.
Push it up.
Yes, pushing it up. Yeah. So all this is defined between USA, or inside Europe. We don't know much about China because China is not part of the, let's say, liberal world, right? Not West and East as before. But why not having China in the room and ask them, let's do things together to prevent risk? I think that's something that we are still missing. I hosted last week the former head of NASA in SpacePharma in Israel, and he told me this is a big mistake of the US government that we do not have Chinese in the room. Yep. We can learn, we can educate, we can do things faster, and for each nation by itself, it's too heavy on its shoulder to run the space economy or the space development. So those things need to direct us how to protect our people first, universe, actually our Earth planet, the ecosystem, and to be able to survive one nearby each other. There is a lot of room for us in space.
So I'd like to make a point, and maybe hopefully a clear point for the room. We humans in the last 50 years have created a junkyard in space above Earth. I mean, tens of thousands of things bigger than a baseball are just tracked. If you look, some of you may have seen, if you see a image of let's say the Earth with each one of these objects, you can't see through the object. There are so many. It's just a junkyard. And we humans have done that in the last 50 years. And when you said ecosystem, the Earth, we humans are starting to care about the environment because it's starting to impact our lives. So we think a lot about the weather and the things that impact us here on Earth. But the environment doesn't stop in the clouds. The environment of Earth includes the proximity of space, which has less oxygen, but it has an environmental impact on all of us. And there's a junkyard up there. Now that we're cognizant, or we're aware that, this is we probably shouldn't keep doing this, companies are either self-regulating, putting in a disposal device into each one of their satellites, like our friends, there's a company in the United States called Planet that is putting up private satellites they call Doves because they're very much into peace, and the Doves do not carry anything military, I can guarantee you.
Right.
And there's thousands or hundreds of them now, but they didn't need to be told to build disposal devices.
Yeah, little drag.
Yeah, a little drag, and disposal meaning it's easy to dispose of something is if you're in low Earth orbit, you just kind of drop down and the atmosphere catches you and you burn up. So you just incinerate yourself. And we can say, well, there's a little bit of like poison in the atmosphere because of that, but it's kind of negligible. Yeah.
Yeah. We're hit by millions of tons of that anyway.
Yeah, but we still have to clean it up.
We should.
Yeah.
I think part of this, by the way, so many of these things go way up into the super macro in the terms of the morality, the sensibility, and the culture of humanity as we are today. And we see it from space all the way down to those bottles over there. We use it and we throw it away. We have this idea of an infinite ecosystem, the infinity of, God gave us this planet and we can do whatever we want with it. And we see that in space. And we're actually starting to transition all the way up to the space vehicles themselves. We're getting into, I talked about this in the last session, what I call rocket ships, where you don't throw them away. But that's a sensibility, that's a psychology. The reason largely that we have, other than the orbital tests, which is pure maliciousness, the reason we have a lot of this debris is because for decades, we've been throwing stuff away on the way up there. You get up there and you throw the shrouds off, and then you throw the upper stage off, and then when your satellite's dead, it's dead. One of our friends, Dan Faber, had this crazy idea, just insane idea. He goes to the satellite companies and he goes, what if you could refuel that satellite? And they're like, what? And then he went even crazier. He said, how about we put a gas cap on there? It blew their minds, right? And because they never thought about that before. They've got $1 billion satellite. It runs out of propellant and they throw it away. And he walks in, and they literally, their heads are exploding like, you mean we could refill this thing?
What if we put a gas tank in your car and you could actually refill it?
What?
And you could use it again.
I've been throwing my cars away for years. No, but I mean, it's that kind of thinking that we're dealing with. And so there is a level of cultural morality, cultural thinking that we have to get past. It's sort of cave person-like, you know? So as we're moving further out, though, let's talk about this. We've talked about the destruction of satellites and things like that. That should obviously be illegal. I don't know how you penalize people for doing that or countries for doing that. That's a little rough. What about the idea of purposeful placement of anti-satellite weapons in space?
Purposeful placement of anti-satellite weapons.
It's not a theory anymore.
Oh,
Right.
well.
There is no boundaries for war. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
So although we were experienced so far war on ground, war in ships, now under the water with submarines, in air with aircraft, UAV, drones maybe, close heights, we're going to expose, I believe, to war in space. No doubt. If I would ask you 3 years ago, what will be the first collision in space? Who will be the countries that will have a battle in space? You won't answer Yemen and Israel. But it's happened. Yemen strike Israel, while Israel were trying to protect itself by the Arrow 3 in the atmosphere. Actually, out of the atmosphere, in space. That means that we already in a space war, right? A second example is within a single night, the state of Israel launched close to 300 arrows. It's compared to 300 launchers per night. Okay, within less than 2 hours. Can you imagine that? Into space, 300 arrows to defend the country. So we're already within a space war. It's not a space war that someone is battling, prepare itself, the tools, but we're definitely going to see that coming closer and closer because once you shoot a gun, bullet, it never ends, The mafia, they just start the game. So I believe we're going to see more and more collisions, means war between countries, between weapons, and definitely between sophisticated technologies like laser that will generate different kind of defense and even sophisticated spacecrafts that can go between the atmosphere to space and come down. So that's something that we're going to see very soon. I know about few technologies that are going to support it. It's a very strong and sophisticated vehicle that the F-35 or all the F-22 would look like, a kid's toy.
Yeah, there are, keep in mind, some of these big all of these big satellites, they don't have cameras on them or anything, right? And I know, how would I put this? There are little things floating next to some of those big things from countries that are in opposition to those little things floating next to the big things in case somebody was to push a button. That's happening right now, guarantee you. And it's happening in both directions. And it's going to be devastating. If we hit, we are so dependent on this stuff. I mean, imagine, right? I forgot there was a movie I saw recently. People are out in the countryside, and all of a sudden, all the satellite stations go down, right? And they don't realize it, but they're in World War III, And just imagine that. All of your internet, everything goes down instantly. That's the first step. And it'll happen on both sides. It'll happen all over the world, and we plunge right there. Okay, now that I've depressed everybody, bring us back up, Bob.
I wanted to give you a spoiler alert that we're heading towards optimism.
Right.
Yeah, it's in here. We're going to get there.
We're starting dark, but we're going to get there. We're going to get to the optimism. And maybe I'll start by one of the things that have always inspired me about space is that even when I was a little boy, I could see that space was a realm of diplomacy. I could see that even countries that hated each other back in the Soviet Union and US Cold War made efforts of engineering to build things that could dock together so it could open up the hatch and shake hands symbolically.
Yes.
Adversaries on Earth have created a international space station, each of which has a little compartment and little flags, but they all get together in the commons and to have coffee and to talk about science and space. And that is perhaps the greatest achievement of humanity is an example of international cooperation. It happens in space because you can't do it on Earth without going through customs. And in space, there is no custom. There's customs to get there because you have to go to a country and then do that. But this thing about space is it's a universal commons for the human species. Mm-hmm. You can't put in anything in space without going over multiple countries. And you can go equatorial or polar. But space is a commons, and we've had to learn how to cooperate. We've chosen to cooperate in space. There was another race to space. We were going to talk about the race to the moon, mm-hmm. And that was not really about weaponization of space. And I would like to make a distinction. There's a difference between the militarization of space, which is about surveillance and information and knowledge, and the weaponization of space, which is about destruction, right? And those are two important things, right? And we humans have tried to regulate through international agreements that thou shalt not build anti-satellite weapons, because once one starts doing it, everybody has to do it, and then you're kind of screwed. Mm-hmm. Has that worked?
No.
But who thought that Yemen will read the policy?
Well, yeah, right. This is the problem: is that
it was centralized.
The predictable bad actors won't follow the policy, so the good actors that don't really want to do it anyway will have to do it just to be able to defend against it. So it's kind of inevitable that this threat will be there. However, right. Space remains. The farther we move out from Earth, and maybe we can get into some of the positives here. By moving into space, one of the ironies is the farther we get from Earth and look back, the more we can understand how precious the Earth is and how this is where we make our stand as the human species. There is no other choice. And if we can't figure out how to get along here, we don't get it. There's no plan B right now, right? We can't go live in another world. We can't. This is it.
Yossi?
Go ahead, Yossi.
So I think we covered the policy, the regulation, the standards. We need to be very curious about space. Space is maybe the last resort that we need to keep it shine, mm-hmm. To support us, to help us to do things on Earth and beyond, to manage, to cooperate, to do things together. Otherwise, we will generate another layer of battlefield, which I really don't want to see. And the beauty is that there are more and more organizations in Europe, in the US, even in the Arab countries, in the Gulf territories, Saudi Arabia, UAE, all those kingdoms, generating actually the space court is in, I think, in Dubai. They just mm-hmm. said, we want to have a place to solve disputes. And they will put money into it and will help to reach an agreements and to solve problems. And I think it's beautiful. So we covered the call for actions for leaders. I think leaders need to be more understanding the needs of space, the people in space, the technology in orbit in space, to produce in space maybe. It's going to be the next industrial zone. Could you imagine that? Not only bits, not only data. We are going to produce in space our most effective deliverables from consumers like medicines, like crystals, like body parts, like tissue cultures, things that we cannot, or it's too expensive to produce on Earth. We can use the energy from the sun, so we will keep the green industry alive means planet blue will stay blue, and we will consume the energy from the sun. If in a case of hazard reaction, we can eject the hazard material on the way to the sun, so planet will stay more clean. So there are a lot of advantages to keep space friendly for our life on Earth and among us in space. That's what we need to take care about. Leaders need to understand space, like they understood ocean, like they understood railways before on Earth. Space is another area of living for humanity.
Mm-hmm. We face, and I'm getting ready to go chair an AI panel after this, and we face a lot of the same issues. Basically, our leaders are ignorant. They just don't know what they're dealing with. They don't understand the domains of AI or space. And so it takes intelligent people that are involved in these fields to educate them. But again, I'm going to say something again. I want to be really clear that I believe that the private sector, and again, when I'm saying private sector, I'm including universities, institutions. I'm very carefully not saying commercial space. I'm saying all of the private sector. They want peace. Now, I will say on the commercial side, in most cases, except for those that are the war profiteers, in most cases, the rest of the private sector doesn't want war, doesn't want violence, because it kills their bottom line, right? If you look at the way the private sector operates in the world right now, the international level of deals, and there was this idiocy in the U.S. of blocking the border with Canada, right? And somebody, I'm going to get the number wrong, but when a car is built in the U.S., the parts cross 16 times as the thing is assembled across the border. The general drive of the private sector, of the commercial sector, is towards peaceful integration. It's just not profitable. And again, I'm not talking about, as my friends in Black Sabbath would say, the war pigs. I'm talking about those who just carry on business every day. And so we need to support that. In the US, we basically created the Chinese space program by kicking out
the Chinese?
Yeah, we created, and I forgot his name, but we kicked the guy out. He is considered the hero and the creator of the Chinese space program. We kicked him out under the same sort of paranoia that we're seeing in the States right now, right? And we drove them towards that. The flip side of that, from a US strategic policy side, is we brought the Soviets or the Russians into the ISS, which effectively, and this is speaking to an American audience in a sense, took them off the game board. They weren't competing with us anymore. They were partners with us, and they moved at the same speed we did. So the reason we have this sort of Chinese-US thing going into space could be solved, kind of going towards what Bob was saying, if we would just get together and work together. And as we work together, then we could start really opening up the solar system. Now, I want to talk about that for a moment. As we begin to move out into space, and you touched on it a little bit, there are things happening. So the orbital data centers. Yeah. Data centers consume massive amounts of energy and are just, they're kind of a blight on the land until you're sitting down using your GPT, but we can put them in space. Now, there is that use of it. I met a company a few weeks ago that we've talked about space solar power for decades in our field. It's always been like fusion, it's always 10 years away. I met somebody who I think has cracked the code, and they're called Overview Energy. And what they're doing, instead of this complicated idea where you would collect the sunlight, you convert it into microwave energy, you shoot the microwave energy down, you convert it back to electricity using a fancy antenna farm, and then you put it back into the grid. What these people have done is they're going to use a very, very, and I'm going to use the word laser, but it's not the way you're thinking. It's a very, 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 very low intensity laser. And they're beaming to existing solar farms. They can go to a solar farm and they can say, you know what? You know those 12 hours where it's dark? We can pump in there and we can use your solar panels by sending sort of this low frequency beam down. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And by the way, this guy's like 27. He's like, you know, he's grown up in the space era, the second space era. And I think that's the hope here, that this next generation that's coming up, that's building, that comes out of the Cold War, that comes out of the what I call the space revolution, now they're stepping up. And they are very global in their minds. They are very much cooperative, ISU. These kids, these people coming up, see us as one humanity. And I think as one humanity, we can begin moving out into the solar system and start using the resources. If you want to address that.
Resources.
Resources.
Let's take a time pulse here.
Yeah, how are we on time, ma'am? Okay. How many minutes do we have? 30 minutes?
Oh
my goodness.
13.
Can we? 3-0. Can we leave some
we're
time
done.
to actually?
No.
Can we leave some? Maybe
We're going to move to Q&A, but go ahead and talk about the resources. for a
Okay,
moment.
so just want
Yeah, and then we'll do
leave some
Q&A.
time to interact. Okay, great.
Great.
So resources. So we'll start with the moon.
The moon.
Yes. Well, I want
He
to
was
start.
all ready to go somewhere else.
Okay,
Go
you go
ahead.
somewhere else. I'll go to the moon.
You go to the moon. Okay, so
Moon
resources.
Express guy.
You just mentioned, Rick, here, the data centers most probably should be in orbit, even if it will be expensive. This is my opinion. Why is that? Because we can use and consume energy from space. We can generate massive amount of data, questions, right? Algorithms, and survive it remotely. We can do that. So data centers, it's most obviously. Another thing is the beautiful of generating energy from the sun through those microwaves into those solar fields on Earth. This is amazing. This is amazing technology. Those are just evacuated recently, right? I think in the last year, even less.
In the last year.
So everyone want to have its own data center in orbit. I think Google announced it. SpaceX announced it. Everyone want to have one of those pieces in orbit. And I see more and more tremendous technologies coming from space. I will mention one that might sound a bit very crazy. But you know, we are using DNA. We are creatures, right? In a human arm, my hand, I can hold the entire humanity data within DNA. Now let's put DNA data centers. We just need to define the communication channels, which are not exist. But at the end, we need to be able to survive in radiation area, impact. So we know how to control radiation in technology, like CPU, data, storaging, read and write. And we can also control DNA damage repair by having a sophisticated or a simple protein, the beta-arrestin, to fix damaged DNA in orbit. So we can go much far. I think we can go centuries with this technology. And this is the beauty of the second age of space. I think you mentioned that. And that's where I see humanity going.
Well, we have, in the space community, we have, there's kind of space 1.0, which was the 60s and the big governments and the rockets and the race to the moon and all of that. We've lived through space 2.0, which is the conversion to private sector and small actors and the rest of that, or new space, as we sometimes, or you coined the phrase mostly to call it that. One of the things that motivated me in 2005 was the emerging understanding of the moon that I just thought was this dead, dry rock up there. I thought we went there, we bounced around, we The U.S. won the race, and now what? It's just, why go back? People are asking it. I can see with the Artemis 2 mission going back. Why are we going back to the moon? Been there, done that. But I convened something called the 2005 International Lunar Conference in Toronto, Canada, because I was curious. I was hearing about this rumor that there's resources on the moon, and then I was hearing Pete Worden, our friend, was talking about water on the moon. How can there be water on the moon?
He couldn't share it this time.
He couldn't share it at that point.
It was sensitive.
Yeah, but I was like, wow, if there's water on the moon, why? So water is not even, not just good to drink, but water, hydrogen and oxygen in its constituents is rocket fuel. So it really is, if that's true, then the moon is kind of a gas station in the sky. And that would change if that's true, that would change the economics of space everywhere. So that's interesting. So that's why I started Moon Express. And so, and not the only one. And the idea that the moon is full of resources. And we could talk about the geophysics and the astrophysics that led to that. But basically, when the Earth-Moon system formed, it was being bombarded by asteroids. And the asteroids had minerals and gold and all the heavy metals. That's everything that we mine on Earth, everything that we consider valuable, everything we use for civilization came from space. Well, while the Earth was being enriched by all of this bombardment, the moon was being hit too. That was all landing on the moon. And the difference is the Earth is a big body. It was cooling very slowly. It was still kind of molten. So all that heavy stuff kind of sunk. Notice we have to dig for it. That's because it's sunk. The moon had cooled much faster. So it was like a very rigid body. So when the asteroids were hitting the moon, they weren't sinking, they were shattering. So in general, those resources, very similar ones to what we mine, are basically at the surface of the Earth. Surface of the moon. So from a extraction point of view, very convenient. From a transportation point of view, not. You have to get there first. So then it became, if there's a vast 8th continent of planet Earth called the moon, now it's a transportation problem. Just like getting to the Americas from Europe was a transportation problem across the ocean. If we solved the shipping cost and brought that down, if we just solved the shipping cost to the moon, right, across the ocean of space, then we have an economic opportunity of a whole new world. So that's where the moon sits today, is an economic opportunity, and however, it's also an opportunity for humanity to conquer another world for the first time without conquering each other. And that's the question.
One of the books, mandatory reading, is called The High Frontier. It was written by my old boss, Gerard K. O'Neill, in the 1970s. This is where he put together the economy of the idea of building space solar power satellites, mining the moon, mining asteroids, and expanding human civilization into the solar system. It was a very positive book. It inspired there was a kid in high school named Jeff Bezos. He had it in his book club, right? And a bunch of us, actually, as well. And in fact, that led to us, we started a project, a few of us, called the Lunar Prospector, which around the same time as Pete's thing, helped confirm the existence of hydrogen and water on the moon. As we're looking, oh, by the way, a lot of the metals, the heavier metals that we mine on the Earth, are actually the remains of asteroids that have embedded themselves in the surface. If you want to get an idea of what Bob is talking about, look at a globe of the moon. It's very simple, because the face of the moon, one face of the moon is always facing the Earth. The other one is always facing out. Look at the far side of the moon, and you'll see that it's got asteroid impacts all over it. Those are hits that we would have taken, right? But those are also resources, and that's spread all over the lunar surface. Then we have the asteroids themselves. Along with one of our friends, we started some asteroid mining companies back in the 2010s. We were a little bit too early, but we learned a lot. We helped move space resources from a giggle factor into something reality.
To the Google factor.
To the Google factor, actually true. And so we are looking at a place now, if we can get our act together, if we can work together, if we can establishes the right businesses, and if we can continue to lower the cost of going to space, we're going to be able to access all of this. And we're just right on the edge of all of that. In fact, probably within the next 5 years, it'll start. This whole China-US moon race is really actually a sideshow to the really important stuff that's happening, which is these companies and these groups that are moving out that will enable us to access these resources and the capabilities of space. On that note, any questions? We stunned them into silence.
Yeah.
No. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Hiren. I'm from India. So it's a multifold question mostly. Like it is very idealistic to believe that countries will cooperate together in matter of space, because all the space tech that was developed was basically for military purposes, that was then repurposed for telecommunication and other day-to-day purposes. And because of the current distrust between the countries, how do you, and their race to get hold of as much resources as they can, how, like, do you believe that is it possible to cooperate on a literal gold mine that is the space resource? And the second question is, who will get to decide the space that is diminishing in space to launch satellites? Because USA will launch its own constellation of satellites, China will do its own, maybe EU, India, they will keep on launching the satellites. And there will come a point that there will be no space left in the space to actually launch the satellite. So who will actually decide that real estate? Who will govern that real estate?
Yossi?
Actually, India has their own launcher, PSLV, GSLV, right? And even a new one, little one, very sophisticated. So you can do that, right? No one is preventing you from launching. And actually, I think you are not one of the treaties, so you are not under the ITAR control, so you can launch from India anything to orbit. I used that once. My first data was launched on the PSLV from Chennai. Actually, it was about to launch on the Falcon. Then it was an issue with the Falcon, so we moved to Kazakhstan, and due for the invasion to the Krim Island, we had to move to India. So this little satellite suffered so many stations. At the end, you made it. So India has the capacity, like Kourou, Europe, like United States. They have few launch vehicles which are very strong, and now even in New Zealand, you have rocket labs, for example. So there is no prevention of escaping the atmosphere, actually to launch to orbit. You don't face any regulation on that. You need to be careful, of course, to pay the insurance policy, right? Anti-collision. You need to cover yourself for in-orbit debris, and you need to to manage that you won't hit national assets or something. Otherwise, you're going to be under a very big penalty suit. So that's, I think, the freedom to go to orbit belongs to everyone, under certain, of course, responsibilities, arrangements, and so on. That's for this. What was the first question?
Like countries cooperating in current scenario with space-related matters.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Like basically, my question was like countries are basically fighting each other to grab hold of resources.
Okay, so, from the moon.
On the Earth, and it will translate to space also. So
yeah.
I don't know if we territory.
Bob?
Borders.
Well, yeah. So I think it's very important that we go to the moon as a species and we do it right. And if we take our conflicts from Earth, especially the government conflicts, to the moon, if that's the way it is, it's going to be very hard to unravel that. So that's why I have a lot of faith and hope and was participating in the private sector to start landing on the moon and establishing the way that works. So any lawyers in the room? Okay. Well, I hope this is, no lawyers?
No, that's good.
Where explorers go, lawyers follow. Mm-hmm. So the idea is to be ahead of the lawyers. So the moon is ahead of the lawyers. So there are some international treaties and things you have to pay attention to. But my goal, and I think I hope we still do it, is for small companies with peaceful purposes companies, private sector, whatever it happens to be, land on the moon and establish the base laws. Because where there are no laws, when you do it first and nobody protests, that becomes case law. That becomes embedded law.
De facto.
De facto law. So if the first goers there behave responsibly, and not unlike the gold rush, which maybe wasn't responsible, but the people that went there, it was okay because there's nobody else around. But as soon as a lot of people were there, you start, and then fights broke out, and somebody brought a gun. Then it was like, so it's the same way with the moon. And so if we go to the moon, land, and use the right language, they're called exclusion zones, where you declare a reasonable amount of territory around where you've landed to conduct peaceful things. Maybe you're digging, maybe you're researching, whatever it is. But that's the principle. Once you have that principle down, you can start applying it to other areas of the moon, and other people will start following that. It will ultimately need the protection of a government, because what happens when somebody ignores that and lands on top of you and steals your claim? Then you need somebody to go to a court. You need to be able to sue them, or you need somebody to be able to, a police force to come and kick them out and give it back to you. We're not there yet, but I hope that we do it reasonably, and we establish the proper.
One of the things that has been put out, and I am known occasionally for giving NASA a bit of a hard time, but that was actually good. It's called the Artemis Accords, that many nations have signed. I urge you to look at those. Those are fairly reasonable. And another little tidbit on the flip side of that, you may have heard that China and the US went to fly nuclear reactors onto the moon. Well, there's two reasons for that. They want energy, and the size of the exclusion zone that they can put around a nuclear reactor is times X what they could put around their own habitats, right? And now it's basically, without claiming, without owning.
You're not allowed to claim the moon.
Yes,
is
you
part of the
can't
treaty.
say this is mine, right? Sort of like what happens in Antarctica or around an oil derrick in the ocean. There's a certain area around that nobody else, non-interference zone, can come into. So we're going to see that happening. And it is unfortunate, right? But again, all of this goes back to the way we operate here on Earth. All we're doing is extending ourselves. And I'll say one quick thing about that, and I'll recognize the lady in the back there. There are two schools of thought that I get when I come out of space. And you know what? I'm going to save that for a minute. I'm going to save that till the very end. Ma'am, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. Rather a long time ago,
Yeah.
The 40th anniversary of Gagarin, I was actually invited to speak at a conference on space in Moscow to lay out some ideas that I've been having about how we could, using treaties and a kind of rules of the road, and this was the context where people were really beginning to get much more conscious of the space debris threats. There was still only a tiny number of users sending satellites into space. So we were trying to get ahead of the game, and I set out a set of ideas for how we could, that included actually adding a treaty that would regulate the space traffic, if you like, because back here on Earth, when there were only a couple of cars, you didn't have to do that. But once you had cities full of people, places, you really had to have that. So something like that, rules of the road. The EU took up the rules of the road idea. China and Russia took up the space treaty idea. But the US, of course, shortly after that was 9/11, after that conference in April of 2001, was 9/11, and we had George W. suddenly throwing everything out of the pram, really. And the distinction between military uses, we were trying not to say militarization of space, but we wanted to acknowledge that there were military uses that were good for humanity, like verification and monitoring and all these kind of issues. One of my earlier treaties, which is what had woken me up to this, was the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So you started off, well, when I came in, which was a little bit late, so I apologise. You started off saying I by the way, I found it very interesting. You started off saying you were going to be optimistic, but then you just carried on really depressingly about, particularly when you mentioned the gold rush, because that's the notion. And, we're dealing with the problem in cyberspace of it turning into a wild west of pornography, gambling, and harm to children. How can, what are you offering us?
This is what you get for showing up late.
Well, wait a minute.
The entire
First
first
of all,
5
don't
minutes
be
was
depressed.
completely positive. And no, I'm kidding. Go
Don't
ahead,
be
Joseph.
depressed. We are optimistic with experience.
Go ahead.
Don't be depressed. We are optimistic with experience. So
Yeah,
you understand.
we're being realistic here.
Realistic. So
Go ahead.
you have been to Moscow, right? Today, there is a lot of air traffic, airplanes all over the world, from the east to the west, China, Moscow, Ukraine, far Middle East, all over. There are few traffic controllers, right, on Earth. We're going to see those in orbit. We're going to see those. They will generate. They will be in favor of humanity. They will not be in favor of a war or in favor of controlling something without regulation. We're going to see that, no doubt. I was in Moscow also in those, a little bit later. I think the name of the city is Skolkovo, right? Nearby Moscow. Skolkovo. They invited me for free to speak about it. At the end, they are not in the room because they are brutal these days. So you see that there are some restrictions to those who are doing fighting or threats against others, humans, territories, and so on. So we're going to see arrangements in space law, Artemis. We spoke about Artemis. There are more and more treaties, and at the end we need to live nearby each other. Otherwise, there is no mercy, right?
So I worked on one of the large pieces of orbital debris. My group and we took over the Mir space station for about 9 months. And we had a company called Mir Corp. We were trying to keep it aloft. We were driven out of business basically by NASA at the time because they didn't want to have like a cheap motel when they were trying to build the Grand Hyatt or whatever, or Adlon in space. Recently, a friend of ours named George Whitesides, who was in the U.S. Congress, just floated a bill to stop the deorbit of the International Space Station, which I think is an awful signal to dump that thing on the Earth. Where I live in Texas, if I throw a Coca-Cola can out the window, I'm breaking the law. But somehow it's okay for the government to drop an entire building on the planet, right? So we need to kind of fix that. One angle that I heard recently was the idea of if everybody, these are getting to some of the things you'd have to enforce, but if every spacecraft were required to be painted with paint that had nanoparticles in it, that had blockchain signatures in the nanoparticles, then any collision that occurred later could be traced to the originator of that object, right? We just haven't gotten there. And unfortunately, and I hate to say it this way, I hate to be negative about it, it's going to take, excuse me, ma'am, go ahead, what?
That's really important because I thought you were going to say that if that they were coated with nanoparticles, that actually they themselves would become capable of avoiding.
No, that's a whole different thing. No, what I'm talking about is the fingerprints. So, no, you would have fingerprints on every object sent into space. So if it hits something, you could then investigate the fingerprint and say, this chip of paint shows that this was owned by so-and-so company. So, yeah. And so I'm going to go to this gentleman over here. Go ahead.
Well, actually, I want to be optimistic about this. And I really think that we have it here on Earth. We have space, a huge space. where there is no regulation and there is no fight is the deep ocean. When we have the oceans, the Pacific, and all these areas where there is no regulation, international waters, they exist today here on Earth. And there is no one that owns it and no one fight for it. And so I think we treat this space like we are treating today the international waters and say this is open to everyone and everyone can fish, but no one can come and sit there and put his boat and say this is my waters.
They're trashing the oceans.
Ma'am,
It isn't the answer.
I'm just
Ma'am,
using it
it's
as
his
an
question.
example. We're not going to the
Thank
ocean.
you.
We're not going
Go
to
ahead.
the
Can I
ocean.
have a bit of dialogue? Because
Nope.
you three were very interesting, but you did all talk.
yes, we do. Thank you. That's our job. See, we're up here on the stage. It's a crazy thing. Go ahead.
So no, what I'm saying is actually the international waters can be an example that we can use in space and say, okay, it's open. No one can go anywhere in the international water. I mean, everyone can go, but no one owns it. There's
Right.
no ownership.
Right.
And I think space can work the same thing. The moon can work the same thing. It just have this open space where everyone can come. And if you have your area, no one can invade it. But I mean, there is something on Earth that is working already. That's my point.
So you translate those traditions.
Yes,
In space.
exactly.
I think we need
Bob?
to wrap.
Yeah, are we getting close?
No, there is a
Yeah,
question.
we are 3 minutes.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I saw you. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
This will be the last question, I think.
Yeah.
I'm very practical. I'm from Ukraine and I'm covering drone warfare. I'm a correspondent.
Good, good.
So, with the space, with the Starlink and the others, why do you think there is such a slow burst of the alternative? You know, because I'm speaking exactly about the similar technology, not like the technologies people developing back on the front line. So we know about the One World project. Is it not feasible and viable economically? You know, because for instance, for the last year, there is a discussion that we probably can't fully trust Elon. So why do you think it's so slow developing the alternative? Because everybody I talk to saying it's just too little, like satellites of alternative satellites.
First of all, you need a lot of satellite to have a nice coverage or relevant coverage compared to Starlink. So One World or One Web is one of those. I think they claim few hundreds, not more. I think 900 the most. It's not enough. They build it a bit slower, a bit expensive, and sometimes when you talk to investors, they say, hey, we have Starlink, why to compete with them? So it's true. Sometimes when you see the lion in the cage, you don't bring a cat, right? Even if and we have this lion in the market already.
Yeah.
But definitely we can do difference. There are many small sat providers, CubeSats, that can generate hundreds of satellites. I think Germany is going to build now mass production lines of satellites, 3-digit each, to generate its own constellation. And it's going to be, I'm telling you, it's going to be.
Bob, and then I'll bring it home. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I need to end on a positive, optimistic note. From the cosmic perspective, okay, we humans are just beginning, right? We have an infinite opportunity of space. There's resources there. There's infinite energy. We have a beautiful, beautiful world. It might be the only one. We might be the first light of consciousness in this entire universe.
Could be.
We could be. We have no evidence that we're not, quite frankly. There's a lot of indication that we're probably not, but there's no actual evidence that we're not. So I think, I believe through empirical evidence that people are generally good.
Right.
Everybody I know is really good people, really want to do good things. And I think that that's going to be a general thing that's going to drive us into space as humanity. We might have convergence and a divergence with machinery and intelligence that we create other intelligences. Sooner or later, we're going to meet new intelligence. And I'm believing more than ever these days that the first contact is going to be with an extraterrestrial AI, not necessarily an extraterrestrial biologic. But I think that we have an incredible opportunity and an obligation as the human species to go into space peacefully, to do it the right way. This beautiful world is ours to be stewards of, not ours to possess in our time here and to expand in the universe. And we have all that opportunity ahead of us.
So my last plug will be Why Space, The Purpose of People. I talk about all of this in that book, and it actually ends on a positive note. But I will say this, and I was going to mention this earlier. There are two possible futures, and we have this game in our field all the time. I don't know if you've seen the TV series The Expanse. The Expanse is one possible future, which is a projection of who we are today. And it's just this ongoing everything, it's dirty, nasty war, all of this, prejudice, all of these things going on. And then there's Star Trek. I picked Star Trek. So let's pick Star Trek, okay? Beam me up. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.